Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to, just introduce to you our speaker for today. My name is Carolina Alfaro. I'm the director of the Warrior Cross Cultural Center, and on behalf of myself, and on behalf of the Office of Sustainability, and on behalf of the Office of the Gender Studies Program, we want to welcome you today. Today's conversation is with our Secretary of California Department of Food and Agriculture, Secretary Karen Ross. And so I will go ahead and just share a little bit about Secretary Ross, and then we're going to open up the floor just to give Secretary Ross the opportunity to share. Today will be more of an organic conversation to learn more about the work that she is doing in California, and we will open it up for folks to just ask questions throughout the presentation. So Secretary Ross was appointed Secretary of the California Department of Food and Ag on January 9th, 2019 by Governor Gavin Newsom. And in reappointing Secretary Ross, Governor Newsom cited her unmatched leadership experience in agriculture issues nationally, internationally, and here in California, in areas including to environmental stewardship, climate change adaptation, and trade. Secretary Ross was initially appointed by Governor Edmund Brown Jr. in 2011. Secretary Ross is passionate about fostering and the reconnection of consumers to the land and the people who produce their food, and to improving the access of all California citizens to healthy, nutritious, California-grown agriculture products, celebrated for their diversity and abundance in serving local, national, and global markets. Secretary Ross grew up in this world of agriculture. She was a 4-H kid on a farm in Western Nebraska, and she and her husband, Barry, own about 800 acres of the family farm, where her younger brother, a 4th-generation farmer, grows no-till wheat and fried grains, incorporating cover crops and rotational grazing for beef production. We are so honored and we are so delighted to introduce to you today Secretary Karen Ross. So with that, the mic is yours. Thank you. Let's
Thank you, Carolina.
Give her a warm welcome.
As I always like to say, it's nice to be invited. So thank you for that. I was just intrigued by the topic that you had invited me to talk about, and I apologize. I think we've had to reschedule this at least once or maybe more than that, but it's really good to be here. And I'm most anxious to get to more of a conversation and take some questions and share some thoughts and, you know, what you see as priorities. But I'm just going to start with a really big picture. I think because you're studying here in California, I have to make an assumption, which is always bad, to get into assumitis and think, well, I assume they know this, but just, you know, the role of California agriculture, that because of this Mediterranean climate, the infrastructure that we have and the innovative people that we have the capacity to literally plant and harvest almost every day of the year, which does not happen in very many other states, let alone on very many other continents, with the wide diversity and bounty with which we do it. When we talk about a state that has 400 different viable commercial crops, and yet 80 of those crops make up the vast majority of the farm gate value, and they are the ones that we have the majority ownership in. And unfortunately, in times of drought, we all want to say, shame on you for growing almonds, walnuts, and pistachios. But guess what? When the drought happened after the 70s and then the really bad one again in the 80s, people shook their fingers at farmers and said, you need to shift to higher value specialty crops. And guess what? Our centers of excellence, what we can grow that few other places can't do, is our tree nuts, our vine crops, and obviously all of our specialty crops. If you looked at percentage of the global supply of specialty crops at the volumes that we do it, we're about 26% in the state of California, which makes it really important to think about California grown and California made. Like, could we become the leaders of the input side of that, including custom manufacturing, as we have fewer and fewer people who are interested in doing the hard work, but highly skilled work of farm workers, and they want to see more automation to ease the life of the people who are in the fields doing so much of that hard work. As we think about the new app and the latest in technology and innovation that will allow us to continue to be productive and with an ever smaller footprint, why shouldn't we in California with our innovation let other people invent those kinds of things? We should be doing it. That continues to make our agriculture, the remarkable and most progressive agriculture on the planet, I would argue. So just wanted to give that kind of big picture. Even with the last few years of trade disruptions and COVID disruption, and now supply chain disruption, we have just been hanging in right at about $50 billion for the last couple of years. And that's just in the farm gate value. That's none of the multiplier effect of what it means in many of our counties where agriculture is the major driver. It's where we're adding the value in food processing. And conservatively, it's at least 3 times more than that $50 billion. UC Cooperative Extension partnered with the Centers for Excellence at the Community College Centers 3 years ago to do an assessment of what is the value of our natural and working lands. So it was agriculture, it was forestry, it was agritourism and recreation. They came up with a $333 billion tag on that, and over 2/3 of that was agriculture. And because you're in the Great Central Valley, when we look at a 100-mile circle from Fresno, 2/3 of our agricultural value is in that place. That's how productive that this geographic region is. So it's a really big deal. And what I want to tell you about is why I'm excited to be talking to you. It's because I've seen dramatic change in California agriculture. I came to the state with experience in advocacy. I had worked for a United States senator. I had grown up telling my dad I was not going to stay on the farm. I was not going to marry a farmer, and I wasn't going to stay in Banner County in Western Nebraska. So 2 of those things turned out true. And it was when I left the farm that I knew how much it meant to me. The value system that I have came from growing up and working on a farm, the people in agriculture. And so I got into public policy and politics and found my passion of really connecting policy that has such a huge impact on the bottom line, as well as what we grow and how we grow it. And that's how I got into the career that I'm in. And when I moved out here, there were very few women advocating for agriculture in the public policy arena. And I am so pleased today to tell you that in any given meeting room where agriculture is the topic, it's easily 50%, and depending on the topic, sometimes more than that are women. I find that in the advocacy arena, the willingness to collaborate and to listen to each other's perspective and find common ground is something that I think we've been able to bring a different element to the conversation there. It doesn't mean we're the only ones that are capable of doing that, but it has been something that has really flourished with women in those types of leadership roles, and seeing more and more women throughout the value chain that are finally getting to the ranks. We still have a lot of work to do to get into the corner suites of some of our big brand names and others, but there are women like that out there. And I see women in leadership positions up and down the state, and increasingly more women in farming. And women have always been part of farming. I know it wasn't until about 12 years ago that we actually started doing a census of women in agriculture. But if you think about farm families and farming, I know I grew up like this, and that's how my brother and his wife are. It's not just the man in the family that's asked to sign on the dotted line when they go to get loans, or making the decisions about equipment, or one of them is doing the records and one is doing the marketing. They're both out in the field. They're both doing those kinds of things. Women have always been in agriculture on the farm, but I think we're finally seeing more women being the primary principle. And that is bringing with it a whole new dimension of how we talk about our work, how we connect what we're doing, and paying attention to connecting it to young children to see the possibilities of, what they eat and what that will mean to them as far as being nourished growing up. And so I'm excited about those opportunities and the opportunities for food entrepreneurship. And I say this because when we think about, we ship food around the world, but with a fast growing world population, it's very important that we ensure that populations on every continent are also have the resources, the knowledge, the leadership, the capacity to grow their food and feed their families better. And this is especially important because so many people, we get so caught up in where we are and what we're doing. So many people do not realize that the vast majority, like over 95, maybe even higher percent of farms on the globe are less than 10 hectares. That's less than 20 acres. And the vast majority of people in poverty and are food insecure, almost 1 billion people, are farm families, subsistence farmers who just are trying to grow enough to feed their families and maybe grow enough extra to be able to sell as a way to try to get themselves out of poverty. This is huge, and women make up a vast majority of those farmers. They're the ones that I saw when I was in Africa, my first and second trip to Africa, and their farmers markets. It was the women who were the entrepreneurs. It was the women who were doing the harvest and bringing it to market. And so thinking about women and women's role in growing food with its focus on nourishment, how do we nourish people better so that every young person can grow up and achieve their potential? How do we do this in collaborative partnership ways for the good of a whole community to help rural communities thrive? How do we work with women to continue to push the envelope on entrepreneurship around food, agriculture, the latest in technology, feeding people better, and solving the environmental impacts? What we want to do is maintain our productivity and doing it with an ever smaller environmental footprint. And that's where technology, precision, understanding what the impact of some of our practices are and mitigating that, and doing all of that with a changing climate will help us achieve our goals to eliminate poverty and eliminate hunger. Those are big goals. They've been around for a while. They're both embedded in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And agriculture actually has a strong role to play in a number of those sustainable development goals. So it's hugely important that regardless of where we are, that we do these kinds of studies and participate in these kinds of discussions and bring our creativity and our innovative way of problem solving to this very large global discussion. How do we feed? How do we nourish people better? How do we minimize our environmental impact? And how do we maintain productivity in a changing climate so that we are meeting the food security needs of every citizen on Earth? Nothing too bold about that, right? So I throw that out there to set the stage. There's a couple of things I do want to talk about in particular because food security was mentioned numerous ways. We have, because of our engagement on climate and climate smart agriculture, we as a state are the only state that's making the investment at the level that we are in climate smart agriculture. We build our program on the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service building blocks for climate smart agriculture, water use efficiency, improved nutrient management, methane reduction in the livestock sector, healthy soils. A big part of it is how do we improve our soil health, build up that soil organic matter, draw down carbon from the atmosphere and store it in our soil to improve our productivity, to improve our biodiversity. I mean, it's a hugely exciting. So few people realize that 1/4 of the world's biodiversity is in that first few inches of our topsoil, and we need to take care of it. So it will take care of us. So I'm really proud of the investments we've made. Just with the 2-year budget that was passed, we have $1.1 billion for climate smart agriculture and resilient, healthy food systems. That includes our farm to school program. It includes a nutrition incentives program for those who qualify for CalFresh benefits to be able to redeem those at farmers markets for double bucks on fresh fruits and vegetables and tree nuts. It includes $15 million for an incubator program for food hubs, a way of working with our small BIPOC farmers to be able to do aggregation to reach institutions like schools, which are huge providers of meals in the state. And then a pilot program that we launched a year ago with $10 million, and we now have $60 million on our budget for the next 2 years for farm to school, which is as an initiative that I'm doing with our first partner. We will be releasing our roadmap to really transform school meals, starting with supporting local procurement from small, mid-sized BIPOC farmers as a way to keep that sector thriving, because otherwise there's so many things coming at them. We continue to see consolidation, and we're going to do whatever we can to try to keep that from happening. It is about improved health and nutrition of all the school meals that a child gets, because we know that for too many of our children, because of the inequity issues we have in income in this state, that's a huge issue. So making nutritious, healthy foods attractive, fun, and flavorful is something we know is possible. And so that's the second key of that. And then based on the tremendous input that we've had from stakeholders and survey work and interviews with children, that educational component that is about nutrition, it's about agriculture, what does it take to grow food, and it's about environment, that we make that an integrated approach to education in the classroom, education in the cafeteria, and experiential education, whether it's a school garden, a school farm for our FFA students, or getting tours and connecting with people who are in the food chain to really understand that. That's an area that I'm excited we've been able to build over recent history, and I think it's one that can continue to make a huge difference. And that's on top of the money we have this year. For the next 2 years, we have $100 million for on-farm water use efficiency. We have $165 million for healthy soils. We have $80 million for methane reduction. We have $30 million for pollinator habitat, $42 million for conservation planning, grants that include transition to organic. So you can see why I'm excited to do what I do, right? It's a great time. We've been through a lot. And again, only in California, because of capital gains, would we be one of the states that not only has a surplus in our budget, as the governor said last year, almost an embarrassing surplus, but I think we're putting it to good. And we are doing it in a way that is about how do we future-proof California, continue to build resiliency to climate change, and at the center of everything, equity as our lens. Let's not build back the same way we've always been. Let's build back better by putting equity at the center of all that we do with these new investments that we have. I think I've talked long enough. Let's get to a real conversation and questions, okay? Deal?
Deal.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that great overview. I'm wondering if there are particular new legislation that has either recently gone through that you're particularly proud of, or things that are in the pipeline now that you're hoping to get new attention to, and can talk about some of the impacts that you expect from this.
Yeah, so farm to school is still new, it's emerging. I mean, there was a lot of attention paid to this during the Obama administration. I happened to be chief of staff at USDA at that time. And the first lady at that time, Michelle Obama, made that a huge signature program for herself. Unfortunately, it got politicized. I know you're all shocked to know that here in the United States today, that issues like that get politicized. And so there was a tendency for the last 4 years to really put an emphasis on the kids aren't eating this food, it's all being wasted, these standards are awful, bring back, X, Y, and Z. And it's true, putting healthy food on a plate does not mean it's being consumed and it's fulfilling its nutritional goals. That's why it's important to engage the children in growing it, preparing it, and having it be flavorful and attractive and fun. We can't just treat this as a one-off kind of thing. It's a real whole person approach to doing this. We see the schools where this really takes off and is most successful. And I use Turlock as an example. You have a fabulous farm to school program. You have a central kitchen. You have all of that because the administrators in the Unified School District saw firsthand that when we provide school breakfast, school test scores improve. When we're giving kids good nutrition, behavior is better in the classroom. When I went to the school farm, they not only have the farm programs, and they're teaching children with learning disabilities to do potential landscaping for job creation in the future. They also have a culinary program. First Partner and I went there, and they were all standing just like they do in the Iron Chef program, offering what came from the farm that they prepared for us to do a tasting of. Those are the ways, that kind of experiential engagement, I think, is how we get young people excited about not just yammering on about eat this, it's good for you, but they are a part of what that is. And if we keep it flavorful, and we've had some great cookbooks coming out that kids got to weigh in on, and the school nutrition directors have published that get shared. The Eco Literacy Center does a great job with all of their things. They created California Thursdays about 8 years ago at the Specialty Crop Block Grant. All of their materials are open platform and easily available. They're beautiful. They make you hungry. Those are the kinds of things I'm most excited about. And I think that originally this was in legislation, and we ended up doing it through the budget. But this idea of, the disruptions we suffered in COVID really showed us how dependent we are on very large institutions or offshoring, which is what we're really experiencing now. We've offshored a lot of that. But the question is, how do we build resiliency into our local communities? Because that requires a certain level of redundancy, which we're proud we've squeezed that all out to be as efficient as possible. Someone's got to pay for that, because those assets may not be utilized 100%, which is what everybody strives to do. So how do we put it in at the right places and not overbuild that, but give us all a sense of, within our community, we have small scale meat processing as an example. We have the fruits and vegetables that are appropriate for all of the ethnic requirements of our community, not just a few. How do we do more centralized kitchen, whether it's for hospitals or for schools, but it's from scratch cooking, and it's really relying on the local foods as a source for that. But those are smart ways of building back. I'm not saying it's going to come around easily, because that's how it used to be, and now we're rebuilding it back. But I think it's one very important way for us to address things that combine the viability of small scale and family farming, really addressing food security needs in our communities. And I haven't even talked about our partnerships with food banks, which is fabulous. We always get a little bit of surplus at different times of the year. We have a partnership with the State Association of Food Banks that collect that. They'll pay a very small fee to cover the harvesting costs that oftentimes the farmer can't cover. And so we have 350 farmers in our network that just since the beginning of the pandemic have contributed over 550 million pounds of produce and shelf-stable products, because we have that as a way of donating food instead of just letting it go to waste and be plowed under. Those are the kinds of things I get most excited about, but also all the work we're doing in climate smart ag, hugely important, hugely important. Those are the two areas that go far beyond just our routine, protecting the health of animals and excluding invasive species that can not only ruin crops, but ruin our natural resources, like all the beetle problems in our trees. I got a little off topic. Sorry about that. And a very important area for us that I'm excited to be working on with colleagues across the administration. October has been declared by the Senate in California in perpetuity as California Farmer and Farm Worker Month. It comes in October, which is when we honor the harvest and the bounty of our harvest. But the COVID really reminded us all about the critical infrastructure of agriculture and the essential workers in our communities, our farm workers. And it is very heartbreaking that oftentimes, because lots of jobs in farming are only seasonal, they're not year round, they're not full time. And so we have high levels of poverty and food insecurity with our own farm worker communities. And we also are facing, because there are fewer people wanting to do those jobs, and there's an aging workforce, and the economics are such that we're seeing more investment in automation. We want to do skills development so that our existing workforce has a ladder up, of getting certificate programs, being the ones to operate, do the maintenance on this highly automated equipment, developing the apps or whatever it might be. We can't just focus on creating the new gadgets. We have to focus on the jobs that may be displaced and make sure that there are career and professional opportunities for everyone to have jobs that are good quality jobs. And so I never want to talk about farming without connecting it to the people that have made us the success that we are today.
Go ahead, Wendy.
Secretary Ross, it's so nice to see you again. You spoke to my agriculture policy class last spring, and my head's as full of information now as it was at that time. So I want to start in California, but take us out to the federal level. And I feel like we're in such great hands in California and in regards to agriculture. We're often a laboratory for ideas. We really set the tone for the country, and not just in agriculture in many ways. But my concern is with the Farm Bill and climate change. And you probably know where I'm going with this. And so, we're addressing climate change to a great extent in this state and have been for years. But the Farm Bill is really more reactionary to climate change. We have crop insurance and we have the conservation programs. Do you see a change in the next Farm Bill, or do you know if there's any discussion at that level in regards to that?
That's a great question. I'm laughing because over 15 years ago, I collaborated with a few other instigators to focus on the Farm Bill. It's probably like the 2000, 5 or 8, and we're going to be part of transforming the Farm Bill. And we were really focused on the conservation title because we felt that was the best investment for public benefit. It helps farmers, but the public benefits, if we do practices that improve air quality, improve water quality, that improve habitat, whatever it is. And we're still about the same pots of money are still going into those kinds of things, but we did get a horticulture chapter out of that for specialty crops. I will tell you, Wendy, it's the work that we're doing here, which builds on work that began under Secretary Vilsack at the time when they created these building blocks for climate smart agriculture. Some of the significant research that they did. And he stood up these climate hubs throughout the United States to really focus on climate. A lot of that work, if it was still visible, it was barely visible. A lot of it was buried for the last 4 years, but he has already made investments in those very same things. With the COVID relief bill that passed in December, there's new dollars across all of the department, including some of these programs. And the last I heard when I was driving back from an eye appointment this afternoon is that they expect to have a vote any day now on both the reconciliation bill and the infrastructure bill. In the reconciliation bill, there's $28 billion for conservation, which includes a lot of climate smart ag practices. And so far, that is one that has not been cut because of how many farm groups were supporting that. So I want to step back for a minute and say, in my lifetime, I have never seen such a 360-degree change in the conversation coming from our national farm groups as I have seen in Washington in the last 2 years. I give huge credit to work that was happening at USDA, the fact that we have had so many extreme weather events that have had disasters for agriculture in every part of the country. When you think about how many 100-year floods and hurricanes the coasts have had, when you think about, and I always mispronounce it, what happened in Iowa and Missouri and Illinois corn country last year in the late summer with the winds and rains, the derecho, is that what they called that? It was like a ground cyclone, but it just flattened hundreds of thousands of acres of corn and soybeans. When you have the extended droughts that we've had and more frequent droughts that we've had, I think all of that has added up to people knowing that change is happening and we might have some tools to help make this work. And so Healthy Soils has a momentum behind it that's unbelievable. I think that the farm community is intrigued with we can be leaders on climate solutions because we can draw down carbon. So I've seen just wholesale change and large scale, like letters with 30 to 80 different farm organizations supporting things on climate smart ag and investments in climate smart ag. Senator Schumer announced today that he is going to call for the vote on Robert Bonney, who's the senior advisor to the Secretary on Climate. Robert was in the Obama administration, was the Undersecretary for Natural Resources. He has been nominated to be the Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation. He is a brilliant, pragmatic leader in this space, hugely respected, and he's had a number of holds put on him because everybody knows how desperately the administration wants him. He's a great thinker on this. I just feel like we've got all the ingredients in place. Whether we'll see that as just like a climate change or climate smart title in the Farm Bill or not, I don't know. That the conservation title is being more adequately funded is a very important step in that direction. Sorry, I'm giving such long answers, but it's there's a lot going on in that space and I'm heartened by it. And I hope I'm not disappointed like I have been every year on immigration reform for 20 years.
No, thank you so much for that thorough answer. And so I'm going to show the recording of this to my students this spring. And so you just brought on a ton of great information.
Well, challenge your students because it's not too early for us to start thinking about priorities for the Farm Bill from a California state perspective. And the governor's made it very clear to me that he wants to make sure we have a very strong California fingerprint on the next Farm Bill.
That's awesome. And I know Dr. O'Day is here, our agriculture department chair, and I don't want to put him on the spot. He may actually be off screen for a minute, but he might have some thoughts. There he is. He might have some thoughts as well.
I'm really very sorry. Yeah.
No problem.
Thank you for joining us, and it's really very nice to hear you speak again. I really enjoy every time I listen to you. They have two questions and kind of a little bit varying of, and I'm really very glad that you kind of cited some statistics about national statistics about women, and then talking about farm workers. Mm-hmm. So I just want to know, from your perspective, what's the administration's plan, particularly in California, in when engaging more women in agriculture and also taking care of farm workers?
Mm-hmm. So it has always been a challenge for me. There's no direct connection or authority at the Department of Food and Agriculture to more directly connect with the farm worker community until COVID. And it was in COVID that we were scrambling like everyone else in the world was for first responders to have protective equipment. And we knew we needed that for our farm workers and food processor workers. And so we raised this up, that it's great that you want to keep the food supply open and farmers getting product to people, but if we can't protect our workers, it won't work. And so we were able to, through the state of California, early on, use our purchasing power to be able to provide that protective equipment. We partnered with our agricultural commissioners, because we have one in every county, to be a distribution point of that PPE. Over time, we all learned a lot during COVID. It was like we were building the plane and flying it every day. And we learned the importance of also partnering with community-based organizations as trusted messengers who had connections with some of our hardest to reach communities, because we also learned the critical importance of doing everything in English and Spanish is great, but we literally need 100 more other languages. And we also need that for our farm worker community. So those are the kinds of things that we worked on. We did over 21.5 million pieces of protective equipment during wildfires. We did 7.5 million N95s, because those were also hard to come by, because our first responders needed that as well. Hand sanitizer, gloves were also in short supply. And then because of the leadership of growers and packers in the Salinas Valley, they early on contracted with all those hotels on the Monterey Peninsula that were empty, contracted hotel rooms so that if they had farm workers who were exposed or ordered to quarantine or became ill, they could safely quarantine to protect their family, or if they were H2A workers in a congregate setting, have a hotel room and 3 meals a day and 2 health checks a day to make sure that we could help them get well and back to the fields sooner. And so we modeled a statewide program called Housing for the Harvest. Based on that experience, we partnered with local county public health officers to be able to provide that program. So we've learned a lot out of that. We've been also working very closely on vaccination and testing. The governor listened to our plea, and we did some early access to vaccines for farm workers specifically, and ran clinics on farms were the most popular, like where people work, so they didn't have to travel, or they felt secure because it was where they worked and they were comfortable with that. Those are the things that we're doing. And I think out of that, there's many more ways for us to think holistically about the needs of our farm worker community. They have qualified for some of the rental assistance because in California, we do not tie immigration status to those kinds of programs. And that's been one, we're a high cost state. And so obviously they need that kind of assistance in addition to food assistance. So those are just a few of examples of how we think about that. But we're also very focused on skills development and skills training so that they can, if you can get a specialty in food safety and get your certificate, that gives you additional pay for that. But that also puts you into an arena where there's going to be more full-time year-round work. Those are some of those strategies for that. We have to be thinking ahead with drought. A lot of our annual crops may not get planted, and that's where a lot of the seasonal work happens. So we might see spikes in unemployment. What else can we do to redirect or provide skills training for other jobs that may be open as we think about the green economy, renewable energy, what kinds of jobs would be available there? So, we've got to think about this very holistically and think about where the opportunities are, where the people are, and how do we improve their quality of life and the prospects for their families. Yeah. And as far as women, it seems to be happening organically. We don't have a lot of new beginning dollars, except this year in this budget, we got 2 allocations for the first time ever. For the next 2 years, we have $10 million for new beginning farmers and for farm worker training programs. And obviously women are eager in that case. And we have $12 million for urban farming because of the interest in urban farming, being able to take inventories to know land access is the biggest challenge for new beginning farmers and for urban farmers. So we really want to invest those funds and learn as much as we possibly can about how to make those opportunities available. And I'm especially mindful in some of our urban centers. A lot of the folks that want to do urban farming are new immigrants, and a lot of them are led by their women and their families to be able to do that. And I see urban farming helping to meet the needs in our farm to school program, as well as just being part of community resiliency.
Thank you very much. If I may follow up, yeah. I'm sorry, I need to leave before because I have a class.
Okay.
But if I may follow up briefly on that, I'm glad to hear that there's a beginning farmers program now in the state, and I know that USA has a similar program that has been running for quite some years. And given that you now know what we are about, where we are, you talked about the strategic importance of the Central Valley.
Yeah.
But we have a very small agricultural program here, and we're trying to grow the program. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but at times we get neglected in terms of some of the Fresno, Chico, and all other programs surrounding us that are older. So is there a way in which we can get more recognition, particularly from your area, from your side?
Yeah, well, congratulations. Whoever made the application to get the $250,000 grant on the food safety programs, that was just announced last week or the week before. That's huge. I mean, the Food Safety Modernization Act is gargantuan. It's a huge change for the farm community. How we reach small, diversified farmers, that's still a big challenge for us. And I think it's a way for CSU to supplement and partner with UC Cooperative Extension. We have, through our programs, we've been able to add to the number of small farm advisors, which they need, because here's all the ways they're being challenged. You know, in the good old days, we thought a small farm advisor was all about the agronomic advice that they were going to give, you know, what to grow and how to grow it. And increasingly, they need to work with the farmers on marketing, understanding marketing, putting together a business plan, how to sit down with a loan officer for an operating loan, and regulatory compliance. I'm embarrassed to say, not mine so much as other agencies. So there's this whole wide diversity of ways that we could improve outreach to small farmers to help them survive, and all of those aspects. But this food safety, I don't know the whole curriculum of what you'll be doing with that. I would also say, we know that for farm workers as well as for small farmers, community colleges are going to be really essential part of their ongoing learning. However, we need to teach the teachers for the community colleges, right? Or be the ones to help develop the curriculum. So I got very excited when I saw that $250,000 grant, because I'm thinking, oh, maybe Stanislaus State is going to be the one to help make sure that there's curriculum that could be taught throughout the community college system. So can we connect you with all the ag and natural resource navigators within the community college system to really, how do we leverage each other's centers of excellence and areas of expertise? I also know from your president that, you know, GIS mapping and doing those kinds of things is really important. And obviously for the future going forward, that's going to be more of that. Those are just a few of the things that I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you very much.
So go and be creative.
So you have given us some really great insights into, you know, a variety of different areas. I think that too often we forget that so many of the people that are growing and harvesting our food are also the people who end up being food insecure through much of the year. And I appreciate a lot of the information you're just sharing around that. We've talked some about the food security issues for children in schools and things like the End Child Hunger Act. I think do some really great things. Could you also speak to some of the work that's being done around seniors?
Yes.
And, you know, ways that we're sort of hitting all ends of the life cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for that, because if you haven't by chance had a chance to peruse the state's master plan for seniors, master plan for aging, it's an excellent document. Kim McCoy-Wade was the director of the Department of Aging that put that together. Unfortunately, it was released in the midst of COVID, so it didn't get, I think, the attention that it deserved. But when we all started to work cross-agency on that, we were focused because the governor challenged us to focus on, you know, the big tsunami of white hairs that would be coming, you know, into potential systems. But what we really realized is that we needed to focus on aging in every decade of our life, which puts nutrition front and center, right? If you eat better, younger, and you create that lifelong habit, we can avoid chronic diseases. We can avoid childhood diabetes in many, many cases. We can avoid the incidence of diabetes in adults, stroke, heart attacks, by first starting with nutrition as a foundation for that. But then we also learned, because of our repeated wildfires that have happened in many communities where seniors are a high part of the population, because they're looking for those kinds of more, paradise wasn't called paradise for nothing, is that kind of idyllic setting, more affordability, a lifestyle that seniors were seeking. But we also know in wildfire how isolated they were from potential services, from the shutdown of Meals on Wheels, from losing access to a farmer's market or to a grocery store. So we have the Senior Farmers Market Program. It's a very, very small program. We distribute historically a book of coupons through area aging departments that are part of county government to distribute to seniors who qualify because of their income level. It's one of the programs that makes my heart sing when I go to my farmer's market and I'm standing behind some women who are so excited and they're tearing out their coupon to buy fresh produce at the peak season. It makes me happy. But then I just want to shake my finger at them because they're like, well, that seems kind of expensive. Could you give me a better price? And I'm like, the farmer needs to make a living too. But I'm so happy to see them using that. When we knew that seniors were staying at home and were not going to farmers markets, we partnered with a number of farmers markets and nonprofits to do the purchasing and put it into boxes and deliver it to seniors or to churches where seniors would be comfortable going to pick up those boxes of produce. We had 100% subscription, where oftentimes we distribute the coupon book, and we'll see maybe an 85% redemption value. So it helped the farmers because they were all used, and it helped the seniors, and they loved the diversity of product they got in those produce boxes. So that's our small contribution to that. But it's important that we think about when COVID happened, Meals on Wheels stopped because that was all volunteers, and a lot of those volunteers were seniors. People were not comfortable, going door to door, nor were seniors necessarily comfortable about that. One of the programs we created that we got FEMA dollars for was called Great Plates, which was restaurants had been completely disrupted. We got FEMA dollars for restaurants to be creating prepackaged meals that can be delivered to seniors. And so we tried to think, triple bottom line around all these kinds of things. What were the needs of seniors? What were the needs of so many small mom and pop restaurants that wouldn't make it otherwise? Trying to partner these things together with these public dollars. But we have to think about aging in every decade, and nutrition for me is right in the center of that. And how do we address food security? Because food insecurity also contributes to chronic health problems. Okay, answered all the questions, huh? That's all there is to it.
Well, how about some attention to food waste legislation? Because I think our state is doing more than some other places in trying to address food waste in a variety of ways.
And clearly, if we could reduce food waste, it would have a huge positive impact for the climate, because we use resources to grow it, and then we've wasted that water, those nutrients, that labor to do it. So we have been actively engaged in the Pacific Coast Collaborative on how to reduce food waste. We have a partnership with Cal Recycle that leads on this issue. We want to do food recovery wherever we can. And quite truthfully, 15 years ago, that's how we started our partnership with Farm to Family with the food banks, as a way of keeping it from being plowed under or just sent to the landfill. How do we retrieve that and make sure it's still nutritionally valuable and it's still safe and healthy to eat? So that's been food recovery to prevent it from being waste is one way of doing that. Making sure that we've got systems in place with retailers and others. And retailers historically are big contributors to our food banks. Really, before stuff is no longer of nutritional value, being able to take it off the shelves and get it to food banks who can make sure that it's getting used. And Kroger, just so you know, Kroger itself has a zero food waste policy. That's their goal. They're trying to get to zero food waste by 2025, but maybe it's 2030. So retailers are very important partners in this, as is food service. But when you look at the hierarchy of value, getting it used by humans, including, it all doesn't have to be perfect. You can eat it, it's still good, but that's a huge long-term behavior change. The second most valuable use of food waste is animal feed, especially in a state like California, where we have a high livestock population and we're feed deficit. We import a lot of feed for dairy and poultry. And so we're able to convert food waste. Dairy cows as ruminant animals are very efficient at using that. So I'll take almonds. We grow almonds, and you get the kernel and you get the shell and you get the hulls, which is 55% of the waste stream out of almonds, but we're trying to rededicate that as a byproduct. Guess what? That is a valuable, it provides protein and carbohydrates to the dairy sector. And so we're displacing having to use water and fertilizer for corn, as an example, or forage, because we are able to rededicate those hulls to dairy feed. It's just an example of how we think about food waste going into those streams, as well as to other livestock uses. So if we can focus on how do we all as individuals buy just what we need, because I don't know about you, but especially at farmers markets, I tend to have big eyes and think I'm going to do all these things with all that product. And then all of a sudden, 10 days later, I'm looking at what is this green slimy stuff in my vegetable bin? Like, how do we get excited about preserving it in a way so that it's still useful, or we're chopping it up for that, trying to think about the tops of the carrots also have lots of nutrition. How do we rededicate that to a soup or a new kind of pesto? All my chef friends have done that, and there are several cookbooks now about waste not and their recipes for how to do that. I think there's huge opportunities for each one of us, and I find especially our younger generation is very focused on that, their individual actions and their willingness to go down this pathway to think about doing that. So how do we buy just what we need? How do we extend the use of what we purchased? And maybe it's not right for fresh on the plate, but there's ways of preserving it in a way that we can use in soups and other kinds of products. And really starting a new culture of valuing that as an important way of extending the use of the food that we've grown and we've used all these resources for. Yep. So we have big ambitious goals to try to just keep that organic matter out of our landfills, because landfills are a huge contributor to methane. And I don't know if you all paid attention this week, but the US joined 100 countries in signing on to the methane reduction pledge. And methane comes from black carbon, which is transportation sector, landfills, and livestock. Our dairy families, with their alternative manure management practices and dairy digesters, have already gotten us on the pathway to our 40% reduction goal by 2030. We're over 25% there. And getting this kind of organic matter out of landfills will help reduce methane emissions from our landfills. So important for us all to partner in all the ways that we can to reduce the food waste, or repurpose it, rededicate it, recycle it. Okay, I think we're coming up on the hour. And not everybody asks questions. I hope that's okay.
You've shared a lot of things that we're doing well and doing better. Where are the areas that you think we're doing poorly, or your wish list of this is the great action we haven't taken yet that's going to get us over the next hump?
Well, just on the methane side, there's a lot of new product development. And so on the enteric fermentation side is an area where there's still work to be done. There's a lot of innovation in that space. When we set our goals and our programs 6 years ago, right after SB 1383 passed, we didn't see anything that was viable, because you have to take in the health of the animal, the product, making sure it doesn't impact the product quality. We feel there's a lot of innovation in that space. So I just established last week we call it manure recycling and innovation product development. So we're taking a new look at that. That's an area that's really important. I think the area of energy and electrification, I think with the innovation we're going to see for not just transportation for family transportation, but what we're going to see in lightweight and heavy duty trucks is going to generate more interest, generate electricity. So that's an area for work yet to be done. And being able to help farmers be more self-sufficient in energy, because energy is a high cost for them. So thinking through on-farm energy generation, obviously battery storage is a key part of that, but we are moving leaps and bounds. It's like once the innovation starts, it kind of leapfrogs over and over. 2 weeks ago, I was in Livermore to visit an electric tractor company, and it's happening so fast. Technology, as we know, every year is like moving at what used to be every 10 years, it feels like. Or maybe that's just because I'm so old, it feels that way. But I think that's a huge space of work for us in agriculture and the economy at large. Okay. Anything else?
Wasn't sure if anybody else had another question. I wanted just to first of all, thank you, Secretary Ross, for just so much information and really just also acknowledging, just acknowledging that, it's not just the farmers and the farms that we're acknowledging, but also the people. And I think that's so important to us. Me being a daughter of farm workers here in the Central Valley, I really appreciate that. And just learning about, October now being just farmer and farm workers month is also an added plus.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I just have a question circling back just briefly to, some of the challenges that you might see that women in California ag are currently facing, or if there's, any, perhaps concerns that they might encounter, just here overall.
Yeah, I think depending on the commodity, I think there's still, especially young women in particular that are new, and they're the ones that are taking over for their dads, quite frankly, oftentimes, or they're new and they're eager. Being taken seriously is still an issue sometimes, and it just depends which commodity you're in. It's still really hard to surface names of women to serve on our marketing orders and commissions, and yet it's a great place to prove yourself as an industry leader. And we're always looking for diversity for those committees. And oftentimes, especially if you're new in the farming side, you're spending 24/7 just farming and making the business work. And it may be the next generation will be the ones where we'll start to see more diversity of women, as well as ethnicity of people that are stepping up and saying, hey, I want to serve on this board and commission. But it's an area of need. And so I want to highlight that for you. How do we give the younger women the confidence to say, I can do this and I can serve in this capacity? I think those are important things to think about when we do the kind of work that you're doing in your classes. Those are ones, because they're accepted, they got to have a business plan like everybody else does to go in and get the operating loan. They have the same challenges that new beginning farmers have if they aren't part of a family business already, of access to land. That is our biggest challenge and biggest barrier for new beginning farmers, small farmers, BIPOC farmers, women farmers. Access to land, even if you can find land to lease, with what's happening with the variables for landlords, you can be farming it for 3 or 5 years, and then all of a sudden they're giving notice that you're not going to have that land next year. So that makes it hard to invest in the kinds of farming practices for climate smart ag, for making the investment for drip irrigation and those kinds of improvements. So I keep trying to think, like, how do we work with land trusts and others that maybe there's some land there? How do we do matchmaking with farmers that don't have a next generation that's coming, but they want to see it farmed in the same way that they're farming? Could we start to set up networks so that, farmers that are wanting to retire and they don't have a next generation could see this as a viable way of keeping it in an ag productivity? I don't want to see it all converted to, sorry, we need housing desperately, but we need to grow up and smarter and not continue just munching away at our farmland, because that generates a lot of greenhouse gas emissions when we convert to urban uses. That's my personal prejudice. I'll be very transparent.
Thank you for
Okay.
that.
Well, and I think that you've shown, as we're focusing on food insecurity, you're showing that this starts with policy supporting farms and farmers and farm workers, right?
Yeah.
And then it ties into distribution and the vehicles we use for it and the methods we use for it, and it affects the retail activities that we do, and it affects the ways we get food to schools and to children, and then also the specific supports to the ones that we know for sure are impoverished, food insecure, and otherwise needing that help.
Yes.
And so it is all of these layers of things, and not just the let's give somebody a box of food, but it's the whole pipeline that goes along.
That's exactly right.
if you were, the students in the class that I'm teaching right now are going to, at the end of their several weeks of learning about food insecurity, come up with some, proposals, ideas, strategies for things that might make things better here in the Central Valley or our state, in Mexico City, where some of our students are participating from. What do you see as ways to start dreaming about new changes, or the ways that college age students can be making a difference right now?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back to urban farming. Seems to be taking off as more viable than it's ever been. And so in our conversations with the few advisors we have and cooperative extension, some of that is zoning, and a lot of our cities and counties simply don't have the people power to update their ordinances. So those are, these are some of that behind the scenes stuff that needs to happen so that we can then do an inventory of land that's available for urban farming. We know that some of the barriers there are fencing, water, being able to connect to water. But there are some amazing organizations and startups in our urban centers where they've already figured out what the market opportunities are, and they're getting called on more and more to help start more urban farms. Chefs love to know that they could source something close, to them. So I see urban farming as a really, really, really important aspect that we need to pay more attention to. And many people are thinking urban farming as controlled atmosphere. And that's one aspect of it, growing food closer to where people are, because transportation is such a big cost of getting food to market and part of the greenhouse emissions, carbon footprint of getting it to market. So there's a lot of interest in controlled atmosphere farming, which is great. That's huge capital. And I think that's going to go to more traditional large scale farmers where they're going to Salinas Valley and say, you need to grow closer to Atlanta or whatever it is. And I think that's where you're going to see that investment. But I don't want to ignore it, because that's a whole new side of farming that I don't have a lot of expertise in. So I do see urban farming. I see focusing on, I honestly think if we focus on our areas of impoverishment and teaching them to farm, to grow some of their own food, making sure that we've got the infrastructure for them to be successful will be huge. We have a small refrigeration grant program that initially was focused just on corner stores to get them to offer more fresh produce, but that requires refrigeration and education about what the turnover is going to be so they can offer more. But think about how many more stores at the corner stores and 7-Elevens that now offer at least some fresh produce, some fruit cups, kinds of those things happening. Those are all areas to think about in an unusual way. And just how do we think through neighborhood, it goes back to like community organizing, neighborhoods. How do we all work together better for the good of all? And starting with food and nutrition access seems like a really sound way of doing that. I have a dream that if we're successful with our farm to school program, then the next frontier is farm to healthcare, whether it's hospitals, clinics, senior citizen homes, that we're figuring out how for them to source this food. And I have a very good friend, Santana Diaz, if you ever are interested, trying to get him as one of your speakers. Santana helped create some of the systems for like our Sacramento Kings to source all of their food for concessions 100 miles within Sacramento, and understanding the infrastructure to build that and do the inventory and know what you could do, literally help some new startup businesses in agriculture in this area. He's now the executive chef for the UC Davis Medical Center. And they went from being the lowest on local sourcing to one of the highest. He also is partnering with the Sacramento Unified School District that spent 10 years, but just this year opened a central kitchen and looking at how to do some of the food prep, back and forth. And so I think there's huge opportunities that would be supporting more local procurement, adding value at the local level, and introducing local healthy grown food throughout the system. So all of a sudden it's a holistic way of approaching the whole thing. Yeah. Okay, I do have to go.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you so much, Secretary Ross. We
Stay in
appreciate
touch.
your time. Yes, thank you so
Okay.
much for your time.
All right. Hopefully one of these days I'll be back on campus. It's been a few years since I'm on campus.
That would be wonderful. We'll welcome you back anytime.
Thank
So,
you.
thank
Take
you.
care. Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye.
So once again, thank you all for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. This is being recorded and it'll be available on our YouTube channel through the Warrior Cross Cultural Center. So if you wish to refer back to it at some point, it'll be available. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thanks so much, everybody.